Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good day. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar, Keeping EVs Within Reach, Policy Shifts, Messaging, and Affordability. We have a great topic for you all today. We'll be discussing what it takes to keep EVs affordable, reliable, and appealing to all communities. My name is Simbiat Yusuf Mahler, and I have a few announcements from the 4 team before passing it along to our moderator today. Attendees, we ask that you submit all your questions via the attendee chat. We'll be getting through to those questions shortly after the presentations from our speakers. We will also be sharing with you all the webinar slides and recording following the presentation in a recap email. That will also include some additional resources. So if you have any questions, drop them in the attendee chat and we'll be collecting them in time for the Q&A portion. And in case this is your first time tuning into something Fourth related, and you don't know who Fourth is and what we do, Fourth is a nonprofit organization, and we aim to increase access to clean transportation. We advocate for policy, we create innovative programs and projects, and organize the Roadmap Conference. I mentioned Roadmap Conference because we'll be hearing more about the Roadmap Conference shortly. And we just wanted to use this opportunity to thank our members and sponsors. If you would like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities and membership at Fourth, our membership and partnership manager, Rachel Haverkamp, is ready to have a conversation with you. We will drop a link to more information and how you can learn more about the sponsorship and membership opportunities at Fourth. Ooh, roadmap. I said we're coming back to roadmap, but you have one more day left to save. Our early adopter rate will be ending tomorrow for 15th tax day. The roadmap conference is going to be 2 days of creative content. I will be talking more about the content shortly. But if you're looking for a great opportunity to save at the lowest rates available, you must register in the next day to get that. We'll be dropping a link to the registration. And if you have questions about registration, or if you would like to bring a group to the Roadmap Conference, there'll be more dropped in the attendee chat. And program, we just dropped a sneak peek to our program. And this is, yes, another reason why you should be attending the Roadmap Conference, because we have a great content, a great program and agenda. Our topics that we'll be highlighting, I'm just going to state a few. We'll be highlighting topics like charging in 2026. How are we delivering the experience driver needs? Expanding the conversation, EV education, access and adoption, utilities at the EV crossroads, balancing near-term costs and long-term opportunities. If you would like to hear more about the programming, who's going to be on the program, and if you're just excited and you want to check out more of what the program consists of, a link will be dropped in the chat and we will include that in the recap email as well. And finally, for Roadmap, the Mobility for All scholarship is currently open thanks to our Mobility for All sponsor, GM, General Motors. If you are working in a community-based organization that is bringing transportation electrification and accessible transportation into your community, here is a scholarship opportunity that provides a travel stipend and a complimentary ticket to the Roadmap Conference. If you would like to learn more about the Mobility for All scholarship and how to apply, please look at the link in the chat and we will also include that in the recap email. And finally, join us for the next Charge at Home webinar on April 22nd, where we'll be discussing accessible EV charging at multifamily properties. This is a great conversation. I personally can't wait for this, but if you would like to learn more on making sure charging opportunities are accessible, specifically in multifamily properties, this is a webinar for you to register for, and that link will be dropped in the chat as well. And I promise I am done now. And I would like to introduce Erin. Erin, please join me on stage. Erin is our senior program manager here at Fourth, and she is our facilitator and moderator for this content today. Erin.
Thank you, Simbi. Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you're here for this important topic that we love to talk about. My name is Erin Lush. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior program manager at Fourth, where I lead our Access to Cars team. And I'm so pleased to be here today moderating this webinar on keeping EVs within reach, policy shifts, messaging, and affordability. I'll do a little intro before we bring our panelists on stage as well, because as you've probably seen, government EV incentives, attitudes, and the general landscapes continue to shift and evolve, causing consumers to face additional challenges and uncertainties when considering whether to go electric, which means for all of us working to increase electrification adoption, we're looking at ways to overcome these additional barriers and assist communities in doing it as well. So today, our panel, who I'll introduce shortly, is going to talk about ways to support equitable EV adoption and expansion of access across all communities, including talking about programs, people-centered strategies, and the messaging that we're all using. We are going to hear perspectives and approaches from multiple aspects of this, different lenses, including the manufacturer side, from the state level, and from the local community level. So not only do we get to learn about their programs and the things that they're enacting to work toward these barriers, but also the insights that they've gathered about the real and perceived barriers to access beyond just affordability that communities encounter on their journey to electrification. So I am thrilled to be joined today by these three panelists that are doing incredible work in this area that I've had the fortunate opportunity to work alongside before, and am so thrilled that you also get the opportunity to learn about their work today also. So panelists, if you could join me on camera to wave hello as I introduce you, that would be great. First up, I'll introduce Michael Mayton, the Director of EV Policy and Regulatory Affairs at General Motors. Welcome, Michael. Next up, we have Emma Wyma, an Energy Policy Specialist in Electric Vehicle Charging at the Washington State Department of Commerce. Hi, Emma. And then we have Sandra Jones, the Director of Program Collaborations at Metropolitan Family Service, a nonprofit here in my backyard of Portland, Oregon. Welcome. All right, before we get started with the panel, we'd like to do a quick poll to warm everybody up, which you should see pop up on your screen. And we'd like to know what you think the biggest barrier to EV access is. We'll let this roll for about a minute before we close that, and then we'll get started with our program. All right, we see charging here coming in hot. Okay. All right, I see us slowing down now. We'll take a little snapshot of this and probably address some of these things later as we get into the real and perceived barriers as we go. And it looks like we've got charging here at the top of the leaderboard. So thank you, everybody, for participating. All right. So we're going to move right into our panel now with our first up being Michael. I'll invite Emma and Sandra to mute and go off camera, and we'll let Michael take the stage here to kick us off.
Thanks, Erin. Am I coming through loud and clear? Great.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so so thanks, Erin, for the introduction. My name is Michael Mayton. I'm the Director of EV Policy here at General Motors. I am also a proud board member of Fourth Mobility. So really excited to participate in the webinar today and kind of give a landscape from a manufacturer perspective. So thanks to our friends at Auto Innovators, I have a slide here basically showing EV market share. This might not be a surprise to too many people on the call, to show kind of the market share over the last 5 years, right? Really growing pretty quickly. And then of course spiking with the end of the tax credit and then coming back down to roughly 2022 levels in the first quarter. Now we expect that to rebound slightly, right? There's certainly some payback from the run up to the tax credit going away. But it's interesting, I guess what I would note is even the existence of that tax credit, we did kind of see a leveling off of EV sales in 24, 25, before the expiration. So that tax credit, as we know, made electric vehicles much more affordable. So I was actually glad to see Charging Access kind of in that poll score as highly as it did, because that'll be a main portion of what I'm going to talk about. But on the right, what you can see is, kind of some good news stories, and I think these might not get promoted enough here in kind of the public dialogue around EVs. A recognition that there's over 7 million EVs on U.S. roads today, right? So that's a significant portion. You're only going to see more and more as more EVs come into the market, and we know that there's not a lot of old EVs coming out of operation. There's over 70,000 fast charging ports across the nation, 18,000 installed just last year. That's significant, right? More ports were installed last year than ever before. We've doubled the number of ports available in the last 3 years. And by the way, we are all aligned on one standard now, J3400, or the North American Charging Standard. So there's a few adapters out there, certainly, but anybody in any OEM can use virtually any DC fast charger. Won't say everyone, because there are some edges to that, but charging is more accessible than it has ever been to all electric vehicle drivers. We're seeing chargers being more reliable. We're seeing larger stations with more amenities being built. Charging is essentially becoming, at least fast charging, a real business. 100 EV nameplates available in all shapes and styles. So there's more EVs than ever that are available. 11 states, I think this is important to remember, 11 states still have retail EV incentive programs. So for those of you who are looking out there are some states that are still offering those incentives. We hope more states join. And to the affordability topic, I think we have to also recognize that there will be a surge in the used EV market. We will soon see over 100,000 used EVs per month coming back from lease endings. These are 1, 2, and 3-year-old EVs, often low mileage, right, high battery state of health, that are going to enter the market at really attractive price points. So we're really excited about kind of where we can go from here. Given that, again, there's been a little bit of a rocky road in the last year of EV adoption. What I will say, what are the barriers? And again, I was glad to see the poll there. Really, that uncertainty around the charging experience is really central to the barrier. Of course, right, everybody wants less expensive EVs on the road, and we're participating in that with our Bolt EV, with as the most affordable EV on the market at $28,000, 28,995 actually. But we're still seeing that charging experience, and it really starts with: are there enough public chargers? How do I use them? Where will they be available? How do I pay for it? Just a lot of that uncertainty. If you think about it, a lot of people have never used a public charger, and I know my first experience, it was a little nerve wracking. And then you pile onto that: how do I charge at home? Do I need to install a level 2 charger? Do I need a new electrical panel? So a lot of that concern around charging. I would say secondarily, we still see some educational elements that are missing in the dialogue here. Um, lo- Customers largely don't understand how long these batteries will last and what the warranty is, and how long those batteries last. They think of batteries in terms of their phone batteries and not vehicle batteries, which are of course the market kind of has aligned on 8 years, 100,000 miles for the battery. So another real source of uncertainty right now, and we can get into this, is insurance. The insurance market and how much it's going to cost to insure that electric vehicle. Insurance companies, due to the lack of data, right, with EV repairs, sometimes charge pretty high rates, and hopefully that comes down in the future too. I know we talk to insurance companies quite a bit. So without going too much further, I want to just highlight GM. While a lot of manufacturers are reducing the size of their portfolio, cutting back on their EV programs, we are not. We have 12 EVs available. Everything from the Bolt EV to the Escalade, IQL, everything in between. If you need a crossover, if you need a midsize crossover, if you need a truck, if you need a luxury vehicle, we GM have one for you. We're committed to this. We continue to show our commitment to public charging with Pilot Flying J and Iona, which is our collaboration on infrastructure, and also try to push the envelope on vehicle grid integration. And that becomes an affordability issue when you think about enrolling customers in managed charging programs so they can get the right rate, a discounted rate, when they're charging their electric vehicle. Too many times the utility companies are increasing the prices of that electricity, and by enrolling in managed charging programs, we can make EVs even more affordable from a total cost of ownership perspective. So that's all I got for now. Really looking forward to the conversation. And again, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Michael, for giving that great overview of how the market looks today. A reminder for everybody, please submit your questions through the attendee chat, and we'll invite Emma to come up on stage with me now and hand it over.
Great. Thanks, Erin. And thanks for that intro, Michael. My name is Emma Wyma. I'm an energy policy specialist working on EV charging infrastructure at the Washington State Energy Office. Our team leads a lot of programs to advance clean transportation in Washington State, including a program we'll discuss today, the Washington EV Instant Rebate Program. I'll walk through how decisions were made for how the program was designed and what we learned as the program came to a pretty quick close. So EVs are circling right around price parity with gasoline-powered cars, depending on who you ask. And what we're hearing is that upfront cost is still one of the biggest barriers for low to moderate income households, in addition to the other factors that we already looked at the poll. But with federal incentives going away and limited state funding, including in Washington State, incentives like these are still very important. But how they're delivered is almost more important to who they actually reach. We kept that in mind when designing our instant rebate program. So this program offered up to $9,000 for low-income households to lease or purchase a new or a used EV, right at the dealership at a point of sale. This was a big decision we made to really make this program what it was to do a self-attestation model, which meant they could self-verify their own eligibility for their income qualifications, and they would do it right at the dealership and just self-declare that they met the income threshold. This program was also the first in the nation to run a rebate program that exclusively focused on leases as well, designed intentionally to build the used EV pipeline into Washington and allowed for some flexibility for hesitant EV drivers who might not be ready to just purchase an EV. We didn't design this program in a vacuum. It really started from a lot of community input and public engagement. Public engagement for this program included focus groups, both in person and virtual, in different regions of the state. We did ride and drive events and survey responses and really took those into consideration for design details. Forth was a partner on this program, and Erin was also a huge part in making these the focus groups and ride and drive events just so successful and meaningful. Dealerships were also brought in really early on into the design process. They were the hands and feet of this program being a success, and we needed their buy-in right from the beginning. So what we heard from both dealerships and all other stakeholders involved shaped the massive parts of this program. It shaped eligibility criteria of what do we define low income or moderate income by. It shaped the rebate amounts of how much was enough to make the difference for a family. It shaped decisions like pre-approval versus self-attestation, and it tried to help the pace predictions for this program. It did go faster than expected, but a lot of this input did help us try to project how fast funds would go. And here was actually what was decided on for both income eligibility and the rebate amounts. So income eligibility was based on 300% of the federal poverty limit, which is about $90,000 for a household of 4 people. We had a lot of discussion of where to really set that line and try to include low to medium income families based off of Washington state incomes. And the rebate amount was very generous. We offered the most for a 3-year lease at $9,000, $5,000 for a purchase or a lower term lease, and then $2,500 for a used EV purchase or lease. And here were the outcomes of the program. I think by far the most important number on this slide is the 90% essentiality rate, meaning that 90% of folks who received the rebate said they could not have gotten an EV otherwise. This showed us that the rebates did go to people who actually needed it, and it made the impact for them to be able to get into an EV. The average household income was $53,000, which is right in line with the median income for the state. Dealership enrollment was 99%, who were trained and enrolled and said, we will definitely deliver this rebate for you. This was really important for us too, because it meant that no matter where you were in the state, even the most rural counties or on an island, your local dealership offered the rebate. And the average rebate was about $7,500, showing how persuasive the $9,000 rebate was, which makes a lot of sense. We also learned a lot of just how to build a rebate program while doing this. We learned so much about doing the self-attestation part. We saw that a lot of people said that this meant the difference for them, feeling comfortable participating and comfortable sharing information. It reduced a lot of privacy concerns and reduced real barriers for people. But it also required a huge, robust post-program audit strategy and plan. So we had to plan for that pretty heavily from the beginning. We also learned how important the relationships were with dealers. This was a huge variable for us. We had never done a program that relied so much on dealers implementing something like this. And they were critical for that program being a success. They were the ones talking to customers and taking drivers on test drives in the cars that we were going to give a rebate to. And we learned the most about demand in this program. The funds for this program were exhausted much faster than we initially expected. $45 million was appropriated for this program, and that was gone in less than 3 months. It was really difficult to predict how fast this program would go because it was the first of its kind in so many ways, and especially about including leases in that. And this wasn't the pace of the program we would have wanted or predicted, but it did show us how strong the demand for EVs really is when the price is more affordable. I think what's really important to note, though, is that if we were going to do this right now in 2026, this would be a much more challenging situation than it was when we did this program in 2024. Federal incentives are gone, and they were stackable with this program. So they could get the $7,500 rebate plus up to a $9,000 rebate. That meant a huge difference. And I think part of is what made this program successful was the federal incentives. With federal landscape shifting too, I just think if we did this right now, it would be challenging in new ways, just an important lens to put on it. But I think what this really shows is that price is still a critical barrier, especially for low-income households. But just as important too are the program design decisions for this program. I think easily rebates could have gone to people who would have gotten an EV otherwise if we weren't careful about who was eligible, what the rebate amounts were, and who we actually marketed the program to. It's really important to get trust involved from the beginning, and it really helped us build an EV market that tried to work for everyone in the state. Thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that great overview. Especially enjoyed the lessons learned there at the end. All right, I'm going to invite Sandra Jones back up with me to take over the next. And again, reminder to get those questions in the chat for us. Take it away, Sandra.
Thanks, Erin. Again, I'm with Metropolitan Family Service right here in Portland. This is our 76th year in service. We started out as a small family counseling service and now have several programs serving from the little ones to the older adult community. We have free tax preparation. So if you still want to do your taxes, hit us up because we've got some great virtual and in-person services. It was great to hear the previous presentations because we hear very, very similar things from our community as well with the program that we're a part of. Let's see. All right. So the program that we have is called the Portland Clean. It's from PISA, Portland Clean Energy Fund, and MFS has quite a few programs like I talked about, and we focus on critical community initiatives that kind of draw our programs together. Our program, Portland Electric Ways to Work, is part of the economic well-being part of MFS. So, like I said, our funding comes from Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. We're very proud that this is the first community grant that was created by communities of color for communities of color here in the city of Portland. MFS had an original Ways to Work program, about 20 plus years old now, and that was working with community members with gas-powered vehicles as well as car repairs, and we offered loans for those services. So we've evolved, receiving this grant funding from PSEF to the Portland Electric Ways to Work program. So now we focus mainly on electric vehicles and electric bikes through our program. We really are focused on increasing education accessibility. I think we all can say and agree that the folks that we work with, the low-income folks, are the ones that are the last to hear about information regarding electrification, regarding climate justice. And a lot of times the information we hear in social media and in other areas are not exactly the most true. And so we really are focusing on education and being intentional in information that we share with our community members. Our program definitely includes education of the actual vehicle as well as our bikes. We have a very strong team of wonderful coordinators who work with our community members. We provide cash incentives, which you'll see in the next slide, ranging regarding from hybrids, plug-in hybrids to fully electric vehicles as well as electric bikes. And a required part of our programming is financial coaching. We many times say that we're not a car dealership. We're not here to sell you bikes. We're here to educate you about this area. That's very important in our communities right now. We want to make sure this is a huge asset for you to invest yourself to purchase, whether it's a vehicle or a bike. We want to make sure it's something that's right for you. We're here to empower the individual. We know that you guys know yourself the best. You know your living situation the best. We're here to support you and offer education regarding electric transportation. So we also offer loans. We can underwrite it, or we partner with a local nonprofit credit union that also does a lot of our loans as well. And then we of course say, if you have a relationship with your banking institution, you can get a lower interest loan than what we're offering. We offer 8% loans for credit challenged folks in our community. But if you can get something that's lower than 8%, then absolutely, please take that opportunity, work with your banking institution, and then come back to us and see where we can go regarding purchasing a vehicle. All right, so like I said, we offer these incentives, again, funded by PSEF, anywhere from $3,000 for a new hybrid. A used hybrid is $4,000 up to $7,000 for a fully electric vehicle. And then e-bikes, we offer $1,000 off the price off an e-bike. And then we're here in Portland. And so we know we have bikers that go through all different kinds of seasons, rain, sometimes snow, a little bit of ice and sunshine. And so we want to make sure folks are protected. So we offer $250 off of safety gear for the community member that is part of our program. I was also very interested to see the poll that we had, that we saw that charging access was a concern over vehicle pricing. However, for our program participants, vehicle pricing has been a huge, huge barrier for us, along with infrastructure. A lot of our folks are renters, so the ability to plug in your own garage is not there. finding infrastructure that's working and available, and routing. Now, that's all part of our education part of our program. But that has been a big barrier for us. The pricing has been an issue for us greatly. We've seen hybrid prices increase to be about the same as EV vehicles. Hybrids were at first a more equitable or a more affordable vehicle for our folks, but now we've seen the pricing increase. So we're really looking forward to, what Michael was saying, that leases are coming off and we can see more affordable used EVs on the market, because that's what we're looking for, inventory that's affordable. He mentioned the Chevy Bolt is priced at $28,995. That is a very high amount for our folks that we work with. And so, like mentioned before with other presenters, without the federal rebates, without our DEQ rebate here in Portland, it's been a struggle for our folks to be able to purchase a vehicle that matches the amount of distance, the range that they need. Because we can certainly get folks into a Nissan Leaf, which we've done a few times. Nissan Leaf is fully electric, $7,000. We've had pricing of Nissan Leafs right below $7,000 at about $69.91. And so folks can go home without any out-of-pocket money. However, the range of what a Nissan Leaf gives the driver versus what our community members need a lot of times does not match. So we're hoping that will level off. We can find some equity in cars that they can afford to get into with our incentive. And with increased inventory, we're hoping that's a possibility. So thank you again. If you have any questions, I think I see some questions out in the chat area, and looking forward to our conversation today too.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Love this overview of the program. All right. We've got a bunch of questions coming in, so we're gonna dive right into those. If panelists would like to come back on camera and join me up here. I am gonna start because we've just talked a bit about leases. I think everybody touched on that. And I think this question for Emma can kind of tie a bow on this topic a bit. The question, Emma, from Elena, is why did Washington State decide to do the highest rebate amount towards leases over ownership?
Yeah, this was a huge question for our team as well. And when we designed the program, the first part of that is to build the used EV pipeline. EVs are fairly popular in Washington compared to other states. We've struggled with a used EV supply in the state, and we want to build that pipeline of getting used EVs in the state. Leases are a great way to do that. We also had heard from people during our public engagement that outright purchasing an EV, even with a rebate or even with other incentives, was still too much of a barrier or too scary if you weren't totally sure you were going to love an EV. And offering a lease term and offering more flexible options made people feel more comfortable. So this is a mix of different priorities, but those are the two reasons why we had that built into the program.
Thanks, Emma. Michael, I'm going to send it to your way now. A question from Bridget. Could you provide insight into how GM works with dealerships to educate customers on how to find charging options for their EVs?
Yeah, sure. So we provide dealers a wide range of options, but that available at all dealerships right now. If we're specifically talking about home charging, GM Energy sells both the Power Up and Power Shift products. And if people want to go even further on the vehicle to home system, we sell that as well. So we do have a wide range of products available. They can roll those into their vehicle leases, which is a great way of making it, kind of more affordable. If they don't have home charging, that's a tougher discussion, right? The dealership has to talk to them about where they can potentially charge. I think that's kind of a policy issue that we have to tackle, multifamily, et cetera. But for those residential chargers, where and about 80% of new vehicle buyers do have a place to plug in at home, we have a range of products available to them, demonstrated at the dealership. And to add on to that, I saw another question come in about public charging. GM, and I kind of glossed over it, but we have a relationship with Pilot Flying J, the travel center, and as well as EV Go to build out fast charging across. And then again, IANA, a consortium of 8 OEMs. It's finally got its legs under it. It is well on its way to becoming the number 2 charging provider in the U.S. in just a few years here. They just opened their 100th station, so we're really excited about kind of that path as well. So we recognize that charging, both real and perceived, right, is a big barrier. So we have to kind of attack it on a lot of different fronts.
Thanks, Michael. Sandra, I have one here for you. Sandra, can you share how you help build accessibility to zero emission vehicles and financial support to low income unbanked people?
That is a great question. That's a hard one because we know, number one, finances is a very, very tough conversation to have. It's also very private. And in order to build that accessibility, if you're looking for a loan, which I have to say with our program recently, we've not had a lot of loan folks because it's hard to get a loan and it's just not affordable for our community members that we work with. If you're going to have a loan, then you're going to have a bank account. So we do work with folks, as part of what I said is financial coaching is a required part of our program. So we do help folks create and start a bank account. Like we said, we also partner with a local credit union, Point West Credit Union, and they do also help folks open up a bank account. If you're using savings, the huge part of our, like the example I used regarding the Nissan Leaf, a huge part of our program, the main part is that we don't have any money exchange between ourselves and our program participants. The incentives are offered from our bank to the dealership's bank. So in the case of the Nissan Leaf, that balance was $69.91. There was no money coming from our program participant. The incentive went directly from our bank to the dealership's bank. And then purchase from savings or purchase with no money out of pocket, then they would have to be responsible for getting insurance. And that's a hard part of it too. That's a huge barrier because, like Michael mentioned, it's high. It's a high rate for EV owners. So we try the best we can. I think the main part is education and working folks within that area. It's a conversation to have of building financial stability. And if that is part of their plan, we're hoping that transportation will become part of that plan of financial stability of maybe hopefully using the transportation for work, something that's a reliable transportation to build up that equity, create a bank account, and then move forward with that purchase and with building a bank account and finances.
Thanks, Sandra. All right, we're going to move over back to Emma here. We have a question about verifying. Let's see. How were you able to verify households indeed qualified for the rebate they got? And where did the funding for the Washington rebate program come from?
Yeah, 2 good ones. The funding for this was appropriated by our state legislature. So it was put into an EV incentive account and directed us to do a low income, reduce the overall price or barriers for EV access. So that was the directive we were given, and it was assigned to our agency to administer that program and design it using the language put in the budget. For the self-attestation question, we verified, it was self-verification by them filling out a form directly at the dealership. They had to be very aware of what qualified as the income verification and the thresholds that were written on the slide that I had up earlier. And dealers were also trained to make sure that they understood what those thresholds were and what they were signing, which said, I understand and I self-verify that I meet this eligibility and I definitely qualify for the rebate. That is all they had to do. We made that decision because otherwise there would have to be a pre-approval process. They would have to submit financial forms, which Sandra just mentioned can be really invasive and sometimes completely prohibitive for some families. And those are typically the ones that we wanted to have the rebate. So what we did have to do, though, was a post-program audit to see what actually happened and see if people were actually verifying their income correctly. So after the program came to a close, we did a random sample audit, followed up with folks, and they knew all of this by signing the form, that this was a possibility, that we did a random audit and they would be held accountable if they were found to be ineligible. And a lot of the results show, I think it was 90% of folks who we found to be incorrect were actually within 80% of the state's area median income. A lot of it was a couple $1,000 difference of maybe not understanding all the income involved. So it actually showed less error than we even thought by doing self-attestation.
Thanks, Emma. Sandra and Michael, would you like to add anything on to this idea of what makes these incentive programs successful? No?
I can go. I was waiting to see if Michael was going to
Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay. Huge part of it is definitely education. And like Emma was saying, like if you're providing documentation, that's where we come in with our coordinators to work with folks to make sure that they have the right documentation. Because I think when the federal rebates were there and the DEQ rebates were there, it's a very confusing website to get onto and to go through, and especially if English is a second language for folks who we work with. I think I saw a question in there about the PGE Drive Change Fund, how that's part of our program. So through that grant, we were able to hire a Spanish-speaking individual who helps with our program, and we have a couple of coordinators who are bilingual in Spanish and English. So we really wanted to be able to support folks in their home language. And having so much verbiage and words on the website for rebates, it was very confusing. Even for our coordinators, we had to go through it pretty slowly to kind of get to make sure, we get the right education out there. So I think education is a huge part of increasing accessibility, working hand in hand with folks, and being able to understand the process and making sure that this is something it's a big investment, whether it's nothing out of pocket or it's a car that hopefully will help folks increase their stability financially, and but also share the word. I think accessibility is also sharing the word. If we have one community member go through our program, being able to talk to friends or family that we're hopefully that they could support that work too and come to our program.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And if I were to add, kind of two guidelines I would give policymakers for incentive programs: simplicity and durability. Simplicity meaning it has to be easy to understand. It has to be easy for our dealers, right? Our dealers are our frontline communication with the customer. There are 3,000 dealers across the country. Getting that message out, a simple, easy to understand program is good, rather than something with a lot of rules and a lot of different stuff around it. You can't make perfect be the enemy of the good. I would also say durability. Again, on again, off again programs. We've seen programs last for 4 weeks, and they want, it's hey, communicate to all your dealers that this program's out there, and by the time the program's out there, it's fully subscribed already. So I understand budgets are tight, and there's only a certain amount of funding, but I would advocate for even you still need to provide significant funding, but lower levels of funding for longer are oftentimes more effective than a lot of money for a very short time that goes to, basically the people who were, as Sandra said, very online and knew about it, rather than a durable program that kind of persists. So again, knowing everything is finite. Making sure you at least have these programs run for at least a couple months. I'd love a couple of years, but something that allows us to communicate to dealers, and they can get used to explaining the program.
All right. On that note, with the relationship for dealers and the incentive, we have a question for Emma from Amanda. Emma, can you share how the state effectively built relationships with dealers? Were they wanting to sell more EVs, or was some education or encouragement needed to get them to participate in the program?
Yeah, really good question. That also was part of the design process for this program, was building an incentive for dealers to participate. And the way that we got a lot of the dealers to participate really quickly was working with the Dealership Association, who can talk to all the dealers at once, and also rely on some of our other team members who can actually go out into the field and talk to dealers and say, hey, what did you think about this? Or what's going on with this program? What's going on here? And hearing that on the ground you just can't replace that kind of conversation. But we did offer an incentive to dealers who offered the rebate. part of that was to replace and pay them for the time that they had to take to train and for all the administrative work to learn a new system, to upload documents, to work with us, and to understand the risk that they were taking on. Because the dealership was the one to take on that initial rebate. We reimburse dealers in a batch. So they were taking on some risk by providing a rebate, and they needed to know what the rules were for how they were providing that to customers and how they were presenting the information to customers. So we provided a SPIF for them just to compensate for time and energy and training. And that seemed to be very helpful. I think we had a lot of good conversation with dealers from the beginning of what do you hear from customers and what's really the barrier that you're hearing from clients? Is it really price? Is it charging? So they were really important in designing this program and have continued to be good partners. And I think are a piece of how do we even get EVs into customers. And they're going to go where they have gone to get their previous cars. They go to a dealer and they talk to a dealer about it. They do a test drive. We talk about ride-in drives a lot, but ride-in drives happen every day at dealers. So I think it's important to really treat them as partners and bring them into the design process from the beginning, and acknowledge that every time we have a rebate program or a new process, that changes their entire sales process too. So I think it's public agencies and public officials like myself acknowledging that like we're coming into a business and changing how they do things. We should make sure they're part of that process and decisions.
Yeah. Great. All right, we have a question from Skip. This might be toward Michael here. Thinking about the used EV market, are the folks returning their lease vehicles getting another lease vehicle or purchasing an EV?
Yeah, I think there's some public data about that. That something like 80% of EV drivers select an EV, somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. So it's kind of further proof that once you do go EV, you tend to not go back. You experience all the benefits, right? The reduced cost of ownership, the better driving. You overcome some of those perceived barriers, and you understand that they're not really barriers at all. So absolutely, these people trading in their leased coming off lease are more often than not, and at a rate of 80 or 90%, coming back and purchasing another EV.
Right. Speaking of real and perceived barriers, I'd like to ask each of you, what barriers still need to be addressed? What have you really seen in doing your work? Maybe, Sandra, we can start with you. What do you see as you're working with the community on this program?
I think that kind of goes back to what Emma was talking about dealerships. In a national program with state rebates, it's great because dealers are brought into that education. However, with our program, because there is no federal funding now and there is no DEQ rebate right now, that it is just our program versus the dealerships. So what our team does is we actually go out to dealerships and have a conversation with them and say, this is our program. Please make sure you take care of our program participants. That, we understand dealerships are there for profit. They do have to make money, but we also want to explain to them the education, like not just educating our participants, but educating the dealership of what this program is about, what we're trying to do, what our city's goal is to increase accessibility for all folks. And that includes the folks that our organization works with, our low-income folks. So I think that's a big barrier that needs to come out from the get-go, is education on both sides to make sure that they understand what we're trying to do, our goals, and how we're trying to get there, and we can do that together.
Can I kick that over to Michael as well? The real and perceived barriers. What do you think still needs to be addressed?
Yeah, I think so. I'll take a little bit different tack from the OEM perspective. I think a very real barrier is still home charging, in terms of there's just you're purchasing a vehicle, and again, especially if you're low income, and how do you charge it? Now you're in either a multifamily home or even a single family home, looking at another charge to install level 2 charging. That's still a very real barrier of how we get utilities to, and again, there's utilities out there that do offer programs. Don't get me wrong, but there's 3,000 utilities across the U.S. right? And so certain utilities are doing it right, but it's a very real problem of, okay, I want to buy an EV. How do I charge at home? I think the perceived problem is, how do I charge on the road? Because there's more of those being built every day. They're more reliable, and I think actually, honestly, signage can solve a lot of that. But the very real problem of home, call it home charging, whether it's multifamily or single family home, and the time it takes to install, the complexity. Again, the dealer can point you to maybe an electrical contractor, but what utility do you do, right? So we talk about the explanation dealers have to give customers around their EV. Dealers aren't home electrical experts, right? They don't want to be home electrical experts. So that's a very real kind of connection that I feel is still kind of missing in this overall ecosystem, that we could use some better messaging on, and better connection with utilities. And again, where there's a lot of interest, where there's utilities who have bought in, that's not necessarily an issue, but certainly across the country, we see that as still kind of a barrier.
Emma, do you have anything you want to add to that real perceived barriers question? And what needs to be addressed still?
Yeah, they've both hit quite a bit of the main parts. The part that I see is, as a public agency, a lot of our role is to do charging build out in public areas, and especially in hard to reach areas, or in areas that charging companies are just not incentivized to build. A lot of it is perceived reliability or perceived charging availability. And I say perceived not because the problem isn't real. There's still massive gaps in this country and in our state for charging, but we're finding that even as reliability and accessibility and there's more charging everywhere, there's still this perceived notion that charging is really unreliable. And it's when you have a really bad experience at a charger, you remember that forever and you tell everyone about it. It's like if you go to the gas station and everything goes well, you're not going to tell everyone because that's how you expect it to go. But it's the same thing with charging. If you have a really frustrating, maybe scary, you're put out and you only have a couple miles left, you're not sure if you can make it home, you're going to remember that, and that experience is going to sit with you and whoever else you tell. I think it's so important, at least as public agencies, to get and start holding charging companies accountable to be more reliable as we continue to work on building out chargers, especially in multifamily housing, in communities in rural areas, and in areas that are just not ever going to be reached by the industry.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
couldn't agree more with all of that.
We're going to try to fit two more questions here before we end. I'm going to pivot to this one about insurance and registration rates to see if the panelists have anything to add here. A couple of panelists mentioned insurance rates as a barrier. In California, annual auto registration for EVs is so much higher than gas cars because the state is trying to recoup gas taxes. What is happening in the other states, in Washington, Oregon? Do panelists think there will be any shifts in California policy to reduce the auto registration rates for EVs? And that poses a real barrier for lower income drivers.
I can start
Well, I think
this.
Go ahead, Emma.
Okay, great. I don't really want to start. I just feel like I should say something about this, but it is very real. I think insurance, especially, and also registration fees are increasing. That's just going to be a trend. At least what I'm working on, especially, is how do we talk about where that money is going better to people. In Washington, we have an issue where a lot of it is labeled as an EV fee, when in reality, a lot of it goes to bridges and roads and transit. I think it's really important to show where your dollars are going, and that absolutely should be more visible information. Another piece of that is really talking about the entire cost of driving a vehicle, including registration, and acknowledging the areas that an EV might be more expensive, but also looking at the main ways that it's going to be much more affordable long-term: fuel and maintenance. And talking about that as an all-encompassing cost of driving, and acknowledging that there are going to be costs that you haven't seen before on your utility bill, maybe in a battery in a really long time, but being real about the savings overall, and that even encompassing increases in savings, you are still saving so much money month to month.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's always a lot of anxiety when you shift costs, even if it's a reduced cost from going to the gas station to your electric bill or a registration fee, right? And that registration fee is really in most states, or at least explained as being a replacement of the gas tax to fund roads and bridges and to pay for your use of those states' roads. Now, our advocacy is, hey, every vehicle should pay their fair share, but don't make it punitive on EVs, right? EVs are more than happy, or EV owners should be more than happy to pay their fair share. But again, Emma points out it's a great point. You have to kind of explain that to people. It's not a punitive tax on EVs. It's you're literally paying to use the road. And as that discussion evolves and we talk maybe about VMT taxes and everything else, hopefully, we can get to a good place there. But yeah, I agree. It's not just the fee; it's the fact that of how it's presented is and communicated is important.
So a little bit on the messaging with this piece. I'd like to move into our final question with just a few minutes left here for each panelist. And that's going to be, what is the role of each of these sectors in addressing affordability? OEMs, government, and CBOs. Sandra, would you like to kick us off with this one?
Sure. Well, definitely CBOs, I'd like to speak of, I think, is a huge part of that direct connection and contact with our communities, the ones that we're wanting to increase the access. Like it was mentioned before, without rebates, without incentives, that they really are unable to get into these vehicles. That seems to be a very huge barrier, or really our first barrier for folks. So I believe it's really important for CBOs to get in on that conversation, work with policymakers. I'm on the DEQ rebate rulemaking committee every year to really get that conversation in with all the different areas of OEM, government, and get that collaboration going. Because I think even what the previous question about knowing what these rates and fees are going toward is a huge part of looking at the long-term picture too. And folks really don't know that. I mean, even coming into this work, our team has had to do a lot of education regarding what the fees are, what the pricing are, what an EV is, what's the savings long-term from maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think CBO's roles are definitely getting in the communities, doing outreach, doing feedback, doing community engagement, and finding out what are the barriers for those community members in those low-income populations, and then bringing that back and having a conversation in the larger picture with folks from government and folks from OEM.
Thanks, Sandra. Emma, quickly over to you for the government side.
I could talk about this for an hour, but I won't. But I think the major one for public agencies like ours is charging development. The industry is so new, and it has required a lot of training wheels in some ways. I don't think there's ever any charger in Washington State that hasn't touched a public dollar. That's going to continue to happen for the next little bit while the industry builds up and we figure out the kinks in it. And even just like finding NACS was one of the biggest solutions we can all agree on. So charging continues to be a part of the government. Another piece is just solid data-driven information about cost of driving. There is so many sources out there that are either highly politicized or biased in one way. And I think it's really important to provide data just about for the average driver and consumer to really understand costs of driving and affordability and find those resources and kind of, put that on government websites and other resources that are easy to find for folks.
That's a great point. Michael, can you close us out with the OEM side real quick?
Sure. I mean, it really is continuing to drive down the cost of electric vehicles, right? And with that, it's really all about the batteries still. Batteries are still too big, heavy, and expensive to give customers in the U.S. what they need and what they want in terms of range to make the switch, right? Which is at least 250, if not 300. We have to continue to work to drive those costs down. The business case for affordable EVs still incredibly challenging. I would also say, right, working with our dealers on consumer education, we absolutely have a role to play there. And Emma, I am so glad you talked about NACS. Standardization is the key, right? We have to look at the teens as kind of the Wild West, and we're getting into the 20s or halfway through the 20s, standardizing on the NACS connector, standardizing on interconnection, permitting timelines, everything else. the industry can't be built in a couple years, but standards will really allow kind of it to take off. And I'm super happy the industry is all aligned on NACs going forward, but can't really express how important standards are to everything we're doing in terms of energy, the electrical grid, vehicle grid integration, et cetera. So really excited for that, but cost and standards.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, and thank you for your great questions. Simbi, over to you to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Sandra. And thank you, Michael, for joining us today. Thank you to all of our attendees. And we'll just quickly wrap up. Roadmap. Last day to save. We want to see you all at Roadmap, and we hope to see you all in Seattle. Thank you so much for joining the conversation today, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.